Great. Well, thanks a lot. And how much fun to be together with both of you. And of course, all of us, the three of us, look at these phenomena and share many of the diagnostics and the data which we look at together. But I suppose that I'll highlight a little bit of a different emphasis that doesn't contradict what Jacques has said, but I wouldn't view it in quite the same dynamic. Yes, we are in a time of tremendous transition and transformation. The transformation involves the ecological changes and the technological changes and the demographic changes that Jacques mentioned, and I won't go over them. The transition is fundamentally also a geopolitical transition. Jacques expressed a lot of Europe's angst that it's all alone now in the world. It's going to be picked apart. It's going to be the carcass that the others are going to devour, if I understood him correctly. I think that this is a mood that actually has come about not because this is what's going to happen, but because for 200 of the past 500 years, Europe was clearly in the ascendancy, very exciting from 1500 to 1700. I would say from 1700 to 1900 or 1950, Europe ran the world. And from 1950 to maybe last month, Europe thought it co-ran the world, maybe behind the United States. And now there's a sense of panic. Well, we don't run the world anymore. The US may be our enemy, not even our friend. We're all alone. It's a kind of dramatic change that comes about from a fundamental point, which is for 500 years, from 1500 to 2000, Europe, either by itself, mostly for the first 400 of the years, or together with the United States, during the 20th century, still felt rather dominant. Either the richest part of the world or the imperial part of the world that controlled the rest. And now we're truly in a world in which no one's having that. No one's having Europe lead, certainly. Even that went away already by the end of World War II. And no one's really having the US lead anymore. That's the more recent development. The US is viewed as a lot of, I'll use a technical term, bullshit. That yes, it's powerful, but it's a little bit of a thug. It says we lead, but no one quite wants to follow, and so forth. But I think the fundamental thing that has happened is the age of European or North Atlantic imperialism, which lasted 300 years more or less, is over. It's over for a fundamental reason. Technology, in the end of the day, is shared everywhere. China's rise is certainly the single most powerful geopolitical development of modern times. But as Jacques rightly said, India is right there doing tremendous things. Africa, which is written off or not even mentioned or as a footnote, will be a much, much more important player in the world economy in the decades ahead. You go to any remote African village, people have their smartphones, they're online, they're doing all sorts of things. Doesn't look like so much different from what anyone else does, any other part of the world. And so this kind of convergence of technological capacity, which is by no means complete, because there still is the question of military power. There still is the question of space technology. There still is the question of who has the big AI systems and so on. So I don't want to exaggerate it. But the gap between the major powers and the rest of the world is less, not more. The gap between the United States and Europe and, say, China and Russia, almost gone in effect. And this is profoundly unnerving. I think first to Europe, because Europe already lost its geopolitical lead after two massive wars and had to cede that leadership to the United States. But the US was the partner in NATO, the partner in the free world, the partner in the vision of the world. Europe was rich, happy, prosperous, and felt, at least at the moments that we didn't have direct confrontation with the Soviet Union, relatively safe. Now, what Jacques is expressing is a kind of angst. It's a Trumpist era angst, because we don't know even whether Trump will invade Denmark tomorrow. And by Denmark, I mean Greenland. I would not discount the fact that at some moment Trump declares Greenland to be the United States. We have military bases there. It would not take much to subdue 50,000 Inuit local population. Maybe they'd stand up and cheer because he'd give, I don't know, $1 million to each of them or something. But in any event, Europe feels this angst. Now, I said I was going to differ because I actually don't think Europe is going to be picked apart. I actually don't think Europe is going to remain 27 quarreling countries that have really characterized Europe, you could say, since 476 AD, when the Western Roman Empire fell, or at least that is the conventional date. And it hasn't been put back together, despite a few dramatic attempts to do so. And it's been quarrels all the way through. But in this world of big powers, my guess is within 10 years, Europe will be a big power. And by that, I mean a stronger union, strategic autonomy, a military, a nuclear deterrence, and not just a seat at the table, but Europe is 450 million people and $20 trillion economy, the highest living standards in the whole world in terms of quality of life. And it won't let itself be picked to pieces in the end, either by Trump or by Putin or by China. Europe will be Europe, and I'm not so fundamentally worried. But it won't lead the world. The United States won't lead the world. I think we're going to have a multipolar world, and I like it. That's my main point. I like it because the food is better outside the United States. Because the culture is diverse, because we actually could get along globally, and because we don't have a fundamental reason for blowing up the world, or the social Darwinist or Nazi or Hitlerite or other view that there's a struggle for survival, that some are going to make it and others are going to go down. So I'm much more of an optimist in this way, that, okay, history doesn't prove me right, but the future will, that we could actually get along.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to, I actually did expect a little bit more divergence on the first question. So in the interest of time, I'm going to shift to the second question, where I am going to expect rebuttals by both of you to each other's arguments. And I'm going to dive into the conflict, the war, the hot war that is being fought on the European continent, the war in Ukraine. So I'm going to ask this time Jeff to be the first one to answer the question. When did the conflict in Ukraine start? And why did it start, in your view?
It started in December 1991. It started with the U.S. It continued with the U.S. This is a U.S.-led war. And it started with the fall of the Soviet Union, because when the Soviet Union ended, Jacques was very much a protagonist in those days. I was involved when the Soviet Union ended, inside the White House, the Pentagon, the CIA. The idea was, well, the US won, and we're now in a unipolar world. And it was the US unipolar world, especially the idea that Russia was a third-rate power now. China was, anyway, rice-growing villages. It was nowhere on the radar screen. That we were now in a world in which the US would call the shots. And a lot of arrogant, nasty, not so clever people have led the United States for the 30 years since then. And they played out this vision. Sometimes it's called the liberal hegemonic order. I find the whole thing ridiculous. I don't know what's liberal about it. I don't know what order is. And I think that hegemony is delusional for the reasons that I said earlier. Sometimes people call it just the unipolar world. That definitely was the idea. Sometimes people call it neocons in the US, but the neocons were everybody almost in US foreign policy for almost all of this period, which is every day the American political elite told itself, we're number one. You know, I taught at Harvard, you're almost trained to stand in front of the mirror and say, hey, we're number one. We're number one among the number one. So it's a very arrogant view, but in practice, it was implemented in a specific way, which was NATO enlargement and abandonment of the nuclear arms control framework and regime change. Those were the three ways that it was implemented. NATO enlargement was contrary to the promise given on February 7th, 1990 to Gorbachev that NATO wouldn't move 1 inch eastward. It was a systematic aim adopted by Clinton in 1994, spelled out by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997, that NATO would move forever eastward, I'd say all the way to Vladivostok, basically, but including, of course, Ukraine and Georgia, to surround Russia and the Black Sea. And Brzezinski wrote a whole book in 1997 explaining why that was such a pivotal idea and why Russia couldn't resist that NATO enlargement. So that was one part. The second was abandoning the nuclear arms framework, starting with the US walking out of the ABM treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, and placing anti-ballistic missile systems, the Aegis systems, in Poland, Romania, and claiming the right to place such systems in Ukraine. And this really was destabilizing because the Russians thought, you know what, they're out for a first strike capacity. And I think the Russians really worried about that and continue to worry about that. And then the third is the US penchant for regime change. US diplomacy is, if you don't like another government, overthrow it. If you don't like another government, subvert it. If you don't like another government, destabilize it. And so that is American foreign policy. It's a loser, in my view. It has led to Syria, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Lebanon, and Netanyahu to this moment is still trying to get the US to go to war with Iran. But that's the idea. Overthrow governments. The US famously overthrew or participated in the overthrow of the Yanukovych government in Ukraine in 2014, which started the violent phase of this war. So to my mind, the war came because we had every opportunity for peace. Jacques established the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in the early 1990s because the world was wide open for peace, and it was. I was there. I was advising Gorbachev. I was advising Yeltsin. I was advising the Polish government. I was advising the Ukraine government. No one was talking about conflict. There was not even a concept that there would be a return to conflict. But the United States was so damn arrogant that it did this. Now, of course, just to conclude, I don't know what Jacques' views on this are, but our press every single day for the last 10 years has said that Putin is an imperialist, expansionist, blah, 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 blah. To my mind, having lived through every day of this, this is nothing but baloney. Putin had nothing like that when he came to power. And I know, and I watched it close up, one by one. The United States couldn't tell the truth at any moment. And that, to my mind, is why we're in the mess that we're in. Trump, by the way, it's the most unlikely thing in the world, but he's telling the truth. He said, we don't need NATO. This isn't for us. We got a big ocean. We don't care. And he's right. This was a game from the U.S. side. By the way, a game, but that's why Brzezinski called it a chessboard, for heaven's sake. They view it as a game. This is one of the worst parts of game theory, that life and death is viewed as a game. I know that's not what the word means. That's what we tell our students, but that's the implication of calling it game theory. For heaven's sake, it's not called life and death theory. It's called game theory. And from the United States perspective, the idea was that we can do things and Russia can't resist. From Russia's perspective, it was life and death. It was existential. It was national security. And if you thought about it, as I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if one side views it as a game and the other side views it as existential, which one's going to win in the end?